Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. I'm Derek, 36, and until recently, I thought I was a happily married man. Lindsay, my wife of 8 years, has always been the center of my world. I made it my mission to keep her happy, taking extra shifts at work so she could go back to school, surprising her with her favorite coffee on long days, and spending Sundays watching her favorite shows even when I wasn't into them. I wasn't perfect, but I loved her fiercely. A few nights ago, everything changed. I was working late and got home earlier than expected. When I walked in, I overheard Lindsay talking to her sister, Dana, in the kitchen. I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but the words hit me like a punch in the gut. Sometimes, I regret marrying Derek. He's just safe, you know? I wonder if I settled. I froze. My heart started pounding so loudly, I couldn't hear the rest of the conversation. All the love I'd poured into our life together suddenly felt meaningless. I wanted to storm in and ask her how she could say something like that, but I couldn't move. After standing there for what felt like hours, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. That night, I didn't go back. I drove around aimlessly, replaying her words in my head. The woman I devoted my life to regretted marrying me? I ended up in a parking lot outside a 24-hour diner, staring at the steering wheel. I didn't even cry, I was just numb. After sitting in that diner parking lot for hours, I finally went inside. I didn't know what else to do. I ordered a coffee, even though I wasn't in the mood to drink it, and just sat there staring at the steaming mug. It felt like the walls of my life had caved in. All those memories of us, the trips we took, the nights we stayed up talking, the time I proposed to her on the boardwalk, kept flashing through my mind. They all felt fake now, like they didn't mean the same thing to her as they did to me. I thought about the way Lindsay used to look at me, the way her face lit up when I walked through the door. Had that all been an act? Or had something changed, and I just didn't see it? That thought burned the most. Maybe I'd been too blind, too focused on keeping her happy, to notice that she wasn't. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a motel across town. It was a crappy room with a flickering light and a weird smell, but it didn't matter. I needed space to think. I ignored Lindsay's texts, which were all along the lines of, "Where are you, and you okay?" I didn't know how to respond. The next morning, I woke up feeling worse than I did the night before. My mind was racing, and every path I imagined seemed to lead to the same question: what now? I couldn't pretend I didn't hear what I'd heard. But I also couldn't picture myself confronting her. Not yet, at least. So instead of going home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went for a hike. I used to love hiking when I was younger, back before life got busy. There's this trail about 30 minutes from our house that I hadn't been to in ages, so I drove there, parked my car, and just started walking. The cold morning air felt sharp in my lungs, and the silence of the woods was almost too much at first. But as I kept walking, the weight in my chest started to loosen a little. I didn't have any answers yet, but at least I had some space to breathe. As I climbed up the trail, my mind wandered to how we'd gotten here. Had I let myself become too safe? I knew I wasn't some adventurous, spontaneous guy. I liked routines and stability. I thought Lindsay appreciated that about me, especially after all the chaos she grew up with. Her parents had a messy divorce, and her dad was in and out of her life, so I figured she wanted someone reliable. And I worked hard to be that for her. But now those words, "I wonder if I settled," just wouldn't leave my head. Did she want excitement? Passion? A guy who whisked her away on surprise vacations or showered her with grand gestures? I thought back to the last time I'd done anything romantic, and I couldn't even pinpoint it. By the time I reached the top of the trail, the sun was starting to rise. I sat down on a rock and just stared at the view. It was beautiful, pink and gold clouds stretching across the horizon, with the city far below. I used to love moments like this, but now all I felt was a hollow ache. For years, I'd put Lindsay's happiness above my own. Every decision I made, from where we lived to how I spent my weekends, was based on what she wanted. And now I was starting to wonder if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should have fought for more balance, stood up for my own needs instead of always bending to hers. But at the same time, isn't that what love is? Putting someone else first? As I sat there, I realized something for the first time. I had no idea who I was outside of this marriage. My whole identity was tied to being Lindsay's husband, to making her happy. But now, It was clear I hadn't even succeeded at that. The thought scared me, but it also lit a small spark in me, a spark of anger, maybe even determination. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't go back to the way things were. After spending hours on that mountaintop, I walked back down the trail with a strange mix of emotions. I was still hurt, more than I could even put into words, but there was also this growing clarity. I didn't want to be someone who lived in the shadow of someone else's happiness anymore. I decided to give myself more time before facing Lindsay. I called my buddy Carl, who lived about an hour away, and asked if I could crash on his couch for a few days. He didn't ask too many questions, just said, "Sure man, come on over." That's what I needed, a safe space where I didn't have to explain myself. When I got to Carl's place, I felt like I could finally let my guard down a little. We spent the evening watching a basketball game and eating takeout. I didn't mention anything about Lindsay, and he didn't press. That kind of easy, no questions friendship was exactly what I needed. But even in the middle of laughing at some dumb commercial, my mind would wander back to her. I started questioning every little thing about our relationship. Were there signs I missed? Times when she'd seemed distant or unhappy. I realized how much I'd taken her small complaints about our life as just normal marriage stuff. Like the time last year when she said she was bored with our Friday night routine of pizza and a movie. She'd suggested we switch it up, but I hadn't really followed through. Or how she used to love talking about her dream of opening her own boutique someday, but I never seriously asked her about it. I thought those were just passing comments, but maybe they were her way of telling me she felt stuck. At the same time, I started to get angry. Not the raging, throwing things kind of angry, but the quiet kind that builds up over time. I'd done everything I could to make our life comfortable and stable. I'd sacrificed for her, gone out of my way to be the steady guy she needed, and she called me safe? That word stung in a way I didn't expect. I started thinking about the last few years of our marriage and realized how much of myself I'd put on hold. There were hobbies I used to love, like photography, that I hadn't touched in years because Lindsay thought they were a waste of time. I used to spend weekends exploring new places, but she preferred staying home or doing errands, so I stopped suggesting trips. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I'd been giving up parts of myself to fit into her version of what our life should look like. And now, after all of that, she regretted marrying me? That night, I couldn't sleep. Carl had passed out on the recliner, snoring loud enough to wake the neighbors, but I just lay there staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying her words in my head, over and over again, until I finally grabbed my phone and started writing. I didn't know what I was writing at first. Maybe a letter to Lindsay, maybe just a way to get my feelings out. I poured everything into it, the hurt, the anger, the confusion, and even the small part of me that still loved her despite everything. By the time I was done, it was nearly 4 in the morning, and my hands were shaking. I didn't send it to her. It wasn't the right time. But writing it down helped. For the first time in days, I felt like I had some control over the situation. The next day, I decided to focus on myself. I didn't want to make any big decisions until I felt stronger, mentally, emotionally, even physically. So I went to the gym for the first time in months, just to get out some of the pent-up energy. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step forward. Later, I went to a used bookstore and picked up a photography book. I didn't tell Carl why I bought it, and he didn't ask, but it felt good to reconnect with something that was just for me. I still didn't know what I was going to do about Lindsay, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to be the same guy who walked out of that house. 2 days turned into 5. I stayed at Carl's longer than I planned, not because I was avoiding Lindsay, but because I needed to figure out what I wanted before facing her. I still hadn't responded to her texts. She kept sending them, alternating between short, worried messages like, "Can we talk?" and longer ones that sounded frustrated, like, "I don't understand why you're ignoring me." I didn't have the energy to deal with her yet. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd stare at it for a moment before flipping it over. It wasn't just that I didn't know what to say, it was that I didn't even know what I felt anymore. Was I angry? Sad? Betrayed? Some messy combination of all three? Carl didn't push me to talk, but after the 5th day, he finally asked, "You gonna tell me what's going on, or are you just here for the free food?" I hesitated. Carl wasn't the type of guy to judge, but saying it out loud felt like admitting my marriage was falling apart. "It's Lindsay," I finally said, staring at the floor. "What about her?" I took a deep breath and told him everything, about overhearing her with Dana, the regret in her voice, and how I just walked out. He didn't interrupt, just sat there quietly, letting me get it all out. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Man, that's rough. Did she know you were there? No, I said. At least, I don't think so. He nodded slowly. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but maybe you should talk to her. Get the full story before you make any decisions. I knew he was right. I couldn't avoid her forever. But the idea of facing her made my stomach twist into knots. What if she confirmed everything I'd overheard? What if she admitted she'd settled for me and wished she hadn't married me? I wasn't sure I could handle that. Still, I knew I couldn't stay in limbo. I needed answers, not just for my sanity, but so I could figure out what came next. The next morning, I drove home. My chest felt tight the whole way there, and I had to pull over once just to calm myself down. When I finally walked through the door, the house was quiet. Lindsay wasn't in the living room or the kitchen, but I found her upstairs in our bedroom, sitting on the bed with her phone in her hand. Her head snapped up when she saw me. Derek, she said, her voice filled with relief. Where have you been? I've been so worried. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, taking in the sight of her, messy hair, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping either. I needed space, I finally said, my voice flat. Space. Her brow furrowed. Derek, you just disappeared. I didn't know if something happened to you. I walked further into the room but stayed near the door. Something did happen, I said quietly. I heard what you said to Dana. Her face went pale. What? I came home early the other night, I explained. I heard you tell her you regretted marrying me. That you wondered if you'd settled. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find the right words. Derek. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I don't know, she said, running a hand through her hair. I was venting. Dana and I were talking about relationships, and she paused, taking a deep breath. I said some things I shouldn't have. That's not an answer, I said. Do you regret marrying me or not? She looked away, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I don't regret it, she said finally. But sometimes. I just wonder what my life would have been like if I'd made different choices. Doesn't everyone feel that way sometimes? Her words hit me like a gut punch. I don't, I said. I never have. You've always been it for me, Lindsay. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not yet. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. You've been such a good husband. It's not you, it's... Don't say it's not me, I interrupted. If you're not happy, it's not because of some random circumstance. It's because of us. Because of me. She shook her head quickly. No, Derek. That's not what I meant. I don't even know. I feel like I've lost myself in this marriage. I don't know who I am anymore. Her words struck a nerve. I wanted to yell at her, to tell her I'd sacrificed parts of myself too. But instead, I just stood there, feeling the weight of her confession settle over me like a storm cloud. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like her husband. I felt like a stranger standing in my own home. After hearing Lindsay say she felt like she'd lost herself in our marriage, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to argue, but her words hit too close to home. Hadn't I been feeling the same way? It wasn't the kind of thing I'd ever admit out loud, but deep down, I knew I'd let pieces of myself fade away to make her happy. But that didn't excuse what she said to Dana. I couldn't just let that slide. Do you know how much it hurt to hear you say that? I asked her, my voice low but steady. Lindsay's face crumpled, and tears started spilling down her cheeks. Derek, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for you to hear that. I was just venting, I wasn't thinking. That's the problem, I said. You weren't thinking. You weren't thinking about me, about us. You were just unloading all your doubts like our marriage didn't mean anything. It does mean something, she said quickly, her voice cracking. I swear, Derek, I love you. I've been feeling trapped. Like I don't have my own identity anymore. It's not about you, it's about me. There it was again. It's not about you, it's about me. The same line people always say when they're trying to avoid taking responsibility. Trapped. I said, raising an eyebrow. I've spent the last 8 years doing everything I could to support you, to make you happy. How is that trapping you? She looked down, her hands twisting together nervously. "I know," she said softly. "You've been amazing, Derek. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was just a wife. Like I wasn't Lindsay anymore. I've been trying to figure out who I am, what I want, and I guess I haven't done a great job of talking to you about it." Her words were like a double-edged sword. On one hand, I could see where she was coming from. Marriage has a way of consuming you if you're not careful. But on the other hand, her figuring herself out had come at my expense. She'd been questioning our entire relationship behind my back, and I had no idea. "So instead of talking to me, you talked to Dana," I said bitterly. "You told her you regretted marrying me, that you might have settled. Do you even understand how that makes me feel?" "I know," she said, wiping at her eyes. "I was wrong to say that. It was just one of those late-night conversations where you say things you don't really mean." I stared at her, trying to gauge if she was being honest. "Do you really not mean it?" I asked. She hesitated, just for a split second, but it was enough. I could see it in her eyes. There was a part of her that did mean it. She regretted something about us, even if she couldn't, or wouldn't, say it outright. That hesitation hit me harder than her words ever could. I felt like I was standing on a fault line, waiting for the ground to split beneath me. "I need some time," I said finally, stepping back toward the door. Her eyes widened. "Derek, no. Please don't leave again. We can talk this through." "Talk about what?" I said, shaking my head. "You don't even know what you want. How am I supposed to fix this when you can't tell me what's wrong?" She didn't have an answer. I turned and walked out of the room, ignoring the sound of her crying behind me. This time, I wasn't running away. I wasn't storming out in anger or confusion. I was walking away to protect myself, to give myself the space I needed to figure out what I wanted. I spent the rest of the day driving. No destination, no plan, just me and the road. At one point, I ended up at the beach, sitting on the hood of my car as the waves crashed against the shore. I watched the water for hours, trying to make sense of everything. For so long, I'd built my life around Lindsay. Everything I did, every choice I made, was with her in mind. Now, for the first time, I was starting to wonder what my life would look like without her. It wasn't an easy thought. I still loved her, but love wasn't the issue. The issue was trust, respect, and whether or not we even saw a future together. As the sun started to set, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this break me. No matter what happened, I was going to figure out who I was, outside of being Lindsay's husband. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I stayed at Carl's place again for a couple of nights, but it felt like I was just floating through life, eating, sleeping, existing, without actually feeling present. Lindsay kept texting me. At first, they were long and emotional, filled with apologies and promises to work through things. But as the days passed, the messages grew shorter, more frustrated. "I can't fix this if you won't talk to me, Derek," one of them said. I didn't respond. I wasn't trying to punish her by staying silent, I just didn't know what to say. I was in survival mode, barely holding myself together. Talking to her felt like stepping into quicksand, and I wasn't ready to sink. Instead, I focused on myself for the first time in years. I started my mornings with long walks through the neighborhood, earbuds in, listening to music that used to make me feel alive. Some days, I went to the gym to burn off the restlessness that kept me up at night. Other days, I sat in the park with a notebook, jotting down whatever came to mind, thoughts, memories, even random ideas for the future. One afternoon, I picked up my old camera from the back of the closet where it had been collecting dust for years. Photography used to be my escape before life got too busy, and as I clicked through the settings, the weight of everything seemed to ease just a little. I spent the rest of the day driving around town, taking pictures of whatever caught my eye: graffiti on a brick wall, a woman walking her dog, a kid chasing a kite. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step toward reclaiming the parts of myself I'd lost. 3 days later, I got a text from Lindsay's sister, Dana. "Hey Derek. I heard about everything, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I feel like this is partially my fault since I was the one Lindsay was venting to. I didn't mean for you to overhear that, and I know she feels awful. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. I wasn't mad at Dana. She wasn't the one who said those things, and it wasn't her fault I happened to walk in at the wrong moment. Still, her message reminded me that Lindsay's words weren't just in my head, they were real. I decided not to reply. Instead, I focused on my next step, figuring out what I wanted from my marriage. That weekend, I went back to the house to pick up a few things. I wasn't planning to stay long, just grab some clothes and leave, but when I walked in, the sight of Lindsay stopped me in my tracks. She was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her coffee cup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she looked small, defeated. "Derek," she said, her voice barely above a whisper when she noticed me. I nodded but didn't say anything. "Are you staying?" she asked, a hint of hope in her tone. "Just grabbing some things," I said, avoiding her gaze. She flinched at that, like my words physically hurt her. "Can we at least talk? Please?" The days after that conversation with Lindsay felt like uncharted territory. I'd drawn a line, a boundary, but it was fragile, like I was learning how to balance on my own 2 feet again. I wasn't used to thinking about what I needed. For so long, it had been about what Lindsay wanted, what made her happy. But now, there was no us to prioritize. There was just me, standing in the aftermath of everything we'd built. I went back to Carl's for a while, but even his place started feeling like a crutch. I needed to face my life head-on. So, I rented a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom with mismatched furniture from a thrift store, but it was mine. The first night I stayed there, I sat on the couch and realized I hadn't lived alone since before Lindsay and I got married. The silence felt heavy, like the walls were pressing in on me. I wanted to text her. A part of me missed her so much it physically hurt. But I stopped myself every time. I told myself the space was necessary, that we both needed it to figure out what we really wanted. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from Dana. I hadn't spoken to her since everything happened, so I hesitated before picking up. "Hey Derek," she said when I answered. "How are you doing?" I could hear the caution in her voice, like she wasn't sure if I'd bite her head off for calling. "I'm hanging in there," I said. She paused for a moment. "I just wanted to check in. Lindsay's been a mess lately. She misses you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know how to respond. "She's trying," Dana continued. "She's been seeing a therapist. She's really trying to work through everything." I blinked. "A therapist?" That was unexpected. "She didn't tell me that," I said. "She didn't want to pressure you," Dana explained. "But I think she's hoping it'll show you how serious she is about making things right." I stayed silent, my mind racing. I didn't know if this was supposed to make me feel better or worse. "Look, I'm not calling to guilt trip you or anything," Dana added. "I just thought you should know she's taking this seriously. She knows she messed up." "I appreciate you letting me know," I said, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. After he hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. Lindsay was in therapy. She was trying to figure herself out. And here I was, still trying to untangle my own thoughts and emotions. The next day, I decided to call my mom. We'd always been close, but I hadn't told her much about what was going on. She'd asked a few times why Lindsay wasn't with me at family dinners lately, and I dodged the question. But now, I needed her perspective. When I told her everything, she listened quietly, her voice steady and calm. "Oh Derek," she said when I finished. "That's a lot to carry on your own." "Yeah," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "I just don't know what to do. I love her, but I feel like I've lost so much of myself in this marriage. And hearing her say she regrets marrying me, I don't know if I can get past that." "I get it," she said. "That kind of hurt doesn't go away overnight. But it sounds like you're both trying to figure out who you are, and sometimes, that means taking a step back. You don't have to have all the answers right now." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe I didn't need to decide anything yet. Maybe it was okay to sit in the uncertainty for a while. Over the next few weeks, I started focusing on rebuilding my life. I went back to work, picked up my camera more often, and even reconnected with some old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. For the first time in a long time, I started feeling like myself again, not Derek the husband, but just Derek. Lindsay's messages slowed down but didn't stop completely. Every few days she'd send something, an apology, a memory, a thinking of you text. I didn't respond to most of them. I wasn't ready. But one day, she sent me a picture of us from our first year of marriage. We were sitting on the porch of our old apartment, laughing about something I couldn't even remember. Underneath the picture she wrote, "I miss this." I miss us. I know I've got a lot to fix, but I hope it's not too late. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart torn in two. For the first time in weeks, I typed out a response. I miss it too. But I need more time. And I did. I wasn't ready to forgive her yet, but I wasn't ready to let go either. After texting Lindsay back, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, fear, and an ache I couldn't quite describe. It was the first time I'd acknowledged her in weeks, but it didn't feel like a step forward or backward. It just felt necessary. Her response came almost immediately. Take all the time you need. I'll wait for as long as it takes. For the next few days, I replayed that message in my head. The idea of her waiting for me, giving me space while holding on to hope, made me feel guilty, like I was keeping her in limbo. But at the same time, I wasn't ready to shut the door completely. I needed to keep it open, just a crack, while I figured out what I really wanted. In the weeks that followed, I focused on building a routine. I kept going to the gym, taking photos, and making an effort to reconnect with people I'd drifted away from. One of those people was Mike, an old coworker I hadn't seen in years. We met up for drinks one Friday night, and as we caught up, I found myself opening up about everything that had happened. You've been through the ringer, man, Mike said, shaking his head. But it sounds like you're finally figuring out what you want. I don't know about that, I admitted, swirling the last of my beer in the glass. I'm just trying to piece myself together. Well, it sounds like a good start, he said. Sometimes you've got to take care of yourself before you can even think about anyone else. He wasn't wrong. For so long I'd been so focused on Lindsay, her happiness, her needs, that I'd forgotten how to take care of myself. Now I was learning what it meant to prioritize my own well-being, even if it felt selfish at times. One afternoon, I decided to go through an old box of keepsakes I'd brought to the apartment. It was mostly random stuff: concert tickets, postcards, a couple of Polaroids from our first years together. As I sifted through the memories, I stumbled on a handwritten letter Lindsay had given me on our first anniversary. It was full of the kind of things you say when you're in the honeymoon phase: how much she loved me, how she couldn't wait to spend the rest of her life with me. But one line stood out: you make me feel safe in a way I've never felt before. I stared at the words for a long time, my chest tightening. Safe. That was the same word she used when talking to Dana, but in an entirely different context. Back then, it was a comfort. Now, it felt like an insult. Had I changed? Or had she? A week later, Lindsay reached out again, this time with something unexpected. Hey, her text read. I just wanted to share something from therapy. My therapist asked me what I regret most about our marriage, and it's not what I said to Dana. It's that I didn't tell you how I was feeling sooner. I was scared, to be honest, because I didn't want to hurt you, but in the process, I ended up hurting you even more. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want you to know I'm working on being better, for myself and for you. I read the message 3 times before setting my phone down. It wasn't an apology, it was more than that. It was accountability, something I hadn't heard from her before. It made me realize something. While I was focusing on my own growth, she was doing the same. She wasn't just saying the right things to win me back, she was actually trying to change. The following weekend, I took a drive back to the trail where this whole journey started. It felt fitting to go back to the place where I first started questioning everything, to see how far I'd come. As I climbed the hill, I thought about the man I'd been that day, hurt, confused, and unsure of where to go next. I wasn't that same man anymore. I still didn't have all the answers, but I felt stronger, more grounded. I'd spent weeks rebuilding myself, brick by brick, and I wasn't about to let anyone, including Lindsay, take that away from me. When I reached the top, I sat on the same rock as before and pulled out my phone. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally typing a message to Lindsay. I think it's time we talked. Her response came within seconds. Anytime. Just let me know when and where. I spent the next couple of days preparing myself for the conversation with Lindsay. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say or how it would go, but I knew I needed to lay everything on the table, no holding back. If there was any chance of moving forward, it had to start with complete honesty. We decided to meet at a quiet coffee shop we used to go to when we first started dating. It felt ironic. Back then, those coffee dates were filled with laughter and dreams for the future. Now we were sitting at the same table, but the air between us was heavy with everything we hadn't said. Lindsay was already there when I walked in, nervously stirring her coffee. She looked up when I approached, her face lighting up with a cautious, almost hesitant smile. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I wasn't sure how to start, and she seemed to be waiting for me to take the lead. Finally, I cleared my throat. "So, I began, you said you wanted to talk. I'm here. What do you want to say?" She set her spoon down and folded her hands in front of her, taking a deep breath. "First, I just want to say how sorry I am, Derek. For everything. For what I said to Dana, for not being honest with you, for making you feel like you weren't enough. You didn't deserve any of that." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. But I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear her out. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued. "And I've realized that most of what I've been feeling, this lost feeling, it's not your fault. It's not about you. It's about me not knowing who I am outside of being your wife. I got so caught up in being part of us that I forgot to take care of myself. And instead of talking to you about it, I let it build up until it came out in the worst possible way." I leaned back in my chair, her words sinking in. "You said you didn't want to hurt me," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But you did, Lindsay. You hurt me more than I think you realize." She nodded, her tears spilling over now. "I know," she said. "And I hate myself for it. I've been working on it in therapy, trying to figure out why I've been feeling this way and how to make things right. But I know that might not be enough. I know I can't undo the damage I've done." I looked down at the table, tracing the edge of my coffee cup with my finger. "Do you regret marrying me?" I asked, finally voicing the question that had been haunting me since that night. She shook her head quickly, almost frantically. "No, Derek. I don't regret marrying you. I regret not being honest with you, not being brave enough to tell you how I was feeling before it got to this point. But I've never regretted being with you." Her words felt genuine, but I couldn't ignore the lingering doubt in the back of my mind. "You said you felt like you settled," I said. "Was that just something you said in the heat of the moment, or is that how you really feel?" She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she looked me straight in the eye and said, it was a moment of doubt. "I don't feel that way all the time. I think I was just comparing my life to this idea of what it should look like, and I let myself get caught up in that. But Derek, you're not settling. You're my safe place. My anchor. I don't know who I'd be without you." Her honesty caught me off guard. I could see she was trying, that she was pouring her heart out in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. But her words didn't erase the pain. "I need to know one thing," I said. "Do you still want to be in this marriage? And if you do, are you willing to put in the work to fix what's broken?" She nodded immediately. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I want this more than anything. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "It's not just about you fixing things, Lindsay. I've been doing a lot of thinking too, and I've realized that I've lost myself in this marriage too. I've spent so much time trying to make you happy that I forgot about my own needs. If we're going to move forward, it has to be as equals. I can't be the only one giving, and you can't be the only one struggling. We both need to meet in the middle." She nodded again, a small hopeful smile breaking through her tears. "I understand," she said. "And I want that. I really do." We talked for hours that day, going over everything, our feelings, our fears, the ways we'd both let each other down. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I felt like walking away. But by the end of it, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we had a chance. It wasn't a guarantee, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. I spent the next couple of days preparing myself for the conversation with Lindsay. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say or how it would go, but I knew I needed to lay everything on the table, no holding back. If there was any chance of moving forward, it had to start with complete honesty. We decided to meet at a quiet coffee shop we used to go to when we first started dating. It felt ironic. Back then, those coffee dates were filled with laughter and dreams for the future. Now we were sitting at the same table, but the air between us was heavy with everything we hadn't said. Lindsay was already there when I walked in, nervously stirring her coffee. She looked up when I approached, her face lighting up with a cautious, almost hesitant smile. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I wasn't sure how to start, and she seemed to be waiting for me to take the lead. Finally, I cleared my throat. So, I began, you said you wanted to talk. I'm here. What do you want to say? She set her spoon down and folded her hands in front of her, taking a deep breath. First, I just want to say how sorry I am, Derek. For everything. For what I said to Dana, for not being honest with you, for making you feel like you weren't enough. You didn't deserve any of that. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. But I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear her out. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she continued. And I've realized that most of what I've been feeling, this lost feeling, it's not your fault. It's not about you. It's about me not knowing who I am outside of being your wife. I got so caught up in being part of us that I forgot to take care of myself. And instead of talking to you about it, I let it build up until it came out in the worst possible way. I leaned back in my chair, her words sinking in. You said you didn't want to hurt me, I said, my voice calm but firm. But you did, Lindsay. You hurt me more than I think you realize. She nodded, her tears spilling over now. I know, she said. And I hate myself for it. I've been working on it in therapy, trying to figure out why I've been feeling this way and how to make things right. But I know that might not be enough. I know I can't undo the damage I've done. I looked down at the table, tracing the edge of my coffee cup with my finger. Do you regret marrying me? I asked, finally voicing the question that had been haunting me since that night. She shook her head quickly, almost frantically. No, Derek. I don't regret marrying you. I regret not being honest with you, not being brave enough to tell you how I was feeling before it got to this point. But I've never regretted being with you. Her words felt genuine, but I couldn't ignore the lingering doubt in the back of my mind. You said you felt like you settled, I said. Was that just something you said in the heat of the moment, or is that how you really feel? She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she looked me straight in the eye and said, it was a moment of doubt. I don't feel that way all the time. I think I was just comparing my life to this idea of what it should look like, and I let myself get caught up in that. But Derek, you're not settling. You're my safe place. My anchor. I don't know who I'd be without you. Her honesty caught me off guard. I could see she was trying, that she was pouring her heart out in a way I hadn't seen from her in years. But her words didn't erase the pain. I need to know one thing, I said. Do you still want to be in this marriage? And if you do, are you willing to put in the work to fix what's broken? She nodded immediately. Yes, she said, her voice steady. I want this more than anything. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. It's not just about you fixing things, Lindsay. I've been doing a lot of thinking too, and I've realized that I've lost myself in this marriage too. I've spent so much time trying to make you happy that I forgot about my own needs. If we're going to move forward, it has to be as equals. I can't be the only one giving, and you can't be the only one struggling. We both need to meet in the middle. She nodded again, a small hopeful smile breaking through her tears. I understand, she said. And I want that. I really do. We talked for hours that day, going over everything, our feelings, our fears, the ways we both let each other down. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I felt like walking away. But by the end of it, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we had a chance. It wasn't a guarantee, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. The conversation at the coffee shop gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. It didn't erase the hurt, and it didn't mean everything was suddenly fine, but it felt like a step forward, a small, cautious step. Over the next few days, Lindsay and I stayed in touch. We didn't dive into heavy topics again right away, but we kept the lines of communication open. She sent me updates about her therapy sessions, and I told her about the things I'd been doing to take care of myself. One night, she texted me, asking if I'd be willing to come over for dinner. I hesitated. Being back in the house, our house, felt like too much too soon. But something in her message, the vulnerability behind it, made me say yes. When I arrived, she had set the table with candles and made my favorite meal. It wasn't grand or over the top, but it was thoughtful in a way that reminded me of the early days of our relationship. We ate in silence for a while, and then she said, I know this doesn't fix everything, but I want to show you that I'm willing to try. I nodded. It's going to take time, Lindsay. For both of us. I know, she said softly. And I'm not going to rush you. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not giving up on us. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Over the next couple of weeks, Lindsay and I started spending more time together. It wasn't anything major, just small steps. A walk in the park, a casual lunch, or a quiet evening watching a show we used to love. It felt strange at first, like we were relearning how to be around each other. There were moments of awkwardness, but there were also moments that felt familiar. Like when she laughed at one of my dumb jokes, or when I caught her humming in the kitchen like she used to. I was still guarded, and I could tell she was too, but we were trying. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was something. One night, as we sat on the couch, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for giving me this chance, Derek. I don't take it for granted." I nodded. "I'm giving us both a chance, Lindsay. Let's see where it goes." It wasn't long before reality tested the fragile progress we'd made. One evening, Lindsay brought up something from the past, a time when she'd felt unsupported by me. "I know you didn't mean to," she said carefully, "but there were moments where I felt like my dreams didn't matter as much as yours." Her words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Why didn't you tell me then?" I asked. "I was scared it would make things worse," she admitted. I thought about that for a moment. "I can't change the past," I said, "but I can listen now. If we're going to move forward, we need to say these things out loud. No more guessing." It was a hard conversation, but it felt important. By the end of it, we were both emotionally drained, but there was a sense of relief too, like a wound had been aired out instead of left to fester. The days after that tough conversation felt lighter. It wasn't because the pain was gone, but because we were finally being honest with each other. Lindsay started opening up more, about her therapy sessions, about the fears and insecurities she'd been carrying for years. And for the first time, I shared my own feelings without holding back. "It's not just about what you said to Dana," I told her one night. "It's about how invisible I've felt for so long. Like my efforts didn't matter." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "You matter, Derek. I see that now. I'm sorry I didn't make you feel that way before." Hearing her say that didn't heal everything, but it was a start. Slowly, the walls between us began to come down.